The title of your presentation is one of the most mission critical things out of everything. Because if you don't have a hot title, then you're not going to get anybody to register for the presentation.
Welcome to Clicks and Bricks Podcast. We talk about the entrepreneur mindset.
If you get one shot at this, what kind of shot are you going to take?
If we forget who we are, they're going to forget who you are.
You've got an adversity story that's out of this world.
Everything from that Main Street brick and mortar to that billion-dollar manufacturer.
Down and out, you've done a show, failed, but you've got conviction. So you're going to try it again, right? Was the second one a success?
No, not the second one, because I had to develop my system. So I started doing smaller type of things. In fact, I started practicing on teleseminars.
Okay.
Back then. This is before there was webinars. I mean, long before this was years ago. And so I started practicing on doing teleseminars because my theory has always been, if I can develop a one-to-many sales presentation, it doesn't really matter whether I'm doing it via a teleseminar or a webinar in person. The structure is exactly the same. And by the way, I'm happy to, if we want to get deeper and go over the structure, I'm happy to do that with folks on this call as well. Okay. I figured if I could do that, it didn't matter. And so I started practicing really via teleseminars and some of my own smaller events, right? So I was doing events for entertainers because that's what I was. And so it was easy. So I started practicing there, and I built it up and built it up and built it up. And I started getting better and better results. And then when I had the opportunity to go back to that same seminar that I had bombed at a couple years earlier and speak, I was pretty confident. Now, I didn't know that I was going to produce the 330,000 in sales. Remember, everybody, I only got half of that, right? So I didn't get the entire amount. But I don't know what everyone else's hourly pay is, but it was pretty good. And so I didn't know that. That was my first really big debut of my system. And then ever since then, I mean, it's just, those are like typical results.
All right. Only because you offered.
Okay.
You said you'll break down the system for us, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a ton of nuance under the hood of what you're getting ready to tell us.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the
I'd love to, because every podcast I'm on, man, I want to have it be the most valuable one. I want people to say, man, that was the most valuable one. So let's actually go through this so people can understand it and can construct it. Yes, there is nuance and things like that, and we'll tell people how they can learn more. But here's the basic structure. You want to think of your presentation in 3 parts. All right. And I'm going to tell you what needs to be accomplished in each part. All right. So you've got your opening, then you've got your content section, and then you've got your close. All right. So let's go through what each of those parts need to accomplish. The first thing to understand is that, and this is a super important concept, is that the entire presentation is a close. Okay. So from the beginning, from the very first thing that you say, first thing that comes out of your mouth, until you actually do the close to the last thing you say, the entire purpose of this is designed to get the audience to take the action that you want them to take at the end of the presentation, whether that's actually buying your product, or for most people, it would be getting them to schedule an appointment to further explore this, whatever they're selling. Okay. The mistake that almost everybody makes is that they do a presentation and then they tack on a close at the end. And they think that that's what I did, right? I did a presentation and I thought, oh, I'm going to do such a great presentation that people are going to want to buy. That's not how it works, right? So the entire presentation is a close. The next tip I'll give you before we go into what each piece needs to accomplish is you always create your close first. What most people do when they're creating a presentation is they'll open up their Keynote or their PowerPoint and they'll start at the beginning and then they'll work their way through the presentation until the end. What you actually want to do is you actually want to start your presentation with the close. Do the closing slides first. Put in your offer, all of that stuff. Why? Well, because of what I just said. If everything is supposed to lead to the close, you can't make that happen unless you actually know what the close is going to be and what your irresistible offer is going to be at the end. Because what you're trying to do is create a desire in the presentation for the irresistible offer at the end. Is that making sense?
Are you saying that I present my close first, or I create my close first
You
when I'm
create
creating
the
my
close
presentation?
first. When you're creating your presentation, you always start with the close.
Right.
And it really comes from old time copywriters. One of the things that I learned from a guy by the name of Gary Halbert, who was a brilliant copywriter and marketer, was he often would create his order form first. Before he created anything, he'd create the order form first. And the reason is because before he wrote the sales letter, he wanted to know exactly what it was that he was offering, so he could write a really good sales letter. It's the same exact principle. All right. So here's what each piece needs to accomplish. In your the very first thing before we even get to the opening is what you call your presentation. The title of your presentation is one of the most mission critical things out of everything. Because if you don't have a hot title, then you're not going to get anybody to register for the presentation. No one's going to click on your Facebook ads or your LinkedIn marketing or click after they read your email. The title is so important. Let me give you an example of how important titles are. So there was a book that was called, the title of the book was called Astrological Love by a woman by the name of Nora Hayden, Astrological Love. And the book was dying on the vine. No one was buying this book, Astrological Love. Then someone said, and I think it was a marketer who said, you know what, the content of this book is really hot. How about if we just change the title of the book to something better? And so they changed the title of the book. They barely made any changes to the content. They changed the title from Astrological Love to How to Satisfy a Woman Every Time and Have Her Beg for More. Okay? That book became a multi-million copy bestseller. So the title is, I can't emphasize this enough. It's got to be on a topic that your audience wants to hear about. So nobody, for example, nobody wants to hear about estate planning, right? Hey, I'm doing an estate planning. So nobody's going to show up for that. You've got to you got to talk about the topic, the outcome, the benefit, and you've got to give it a hot title. So that's the very first thing. Now, if you got a hot title, then we've got our opening. Here's what the opening needs to accomplish. Number one, you need to immediately grab your audience's attention. Immediately grab their attention, because especially on a webinar, if those first couple minutes aren't strong and the audience doesn't say, wow, I really want to hear what this person is going to talk about, they're going to start surfing the internet, or they're just going to click off and leave your webinar. In an in-person audience, and you'll see this with speakers, people are looking at their phones, texting on their phones, right? Most people aren't going to be rude enough to stand up and walk out of your presentation, but they'll mentally check out. Right. So you've got to grab the audience's attention immediately. The second thing that you need to do is you need to let the audience know that they are in the right place. Let them know that this is for them. And you do that by discussing what they desire, problems that they are facing, so they understand, hey, this person is talking to me about me. This is a direct fit. Because again, if they think, well, this isn't for me. So for example, when I was first starting out and I didn't have any testimonials, all I had was that I was a magician, I had to let the audience know, just like I did to your audience, that it was the same. My business was no different than any other business. I had to generate leads. I had to close the sale. I had to do all of that stuff to make that connection, right? So the audience has got to immediately know, hey, this is for me. The next thing you want to do is you want to future pace two different scenarios, two different outcomes. The first outcome is you want to paint a picture of how your prospect's life will be if they do what you tell them to do during this presentation. That's the bright, shiny future. And then you also want to paint a negative. So if you don't do this, if you don't follow through on this, this is another possible scenario, which is the dark. Because remember, we're motivated by moving towards motivation, which is positive, but more people are motivated by moving away from motivation, which is negative. So we want to use both. So it's called future pacing, painting a picture of the future, but you want both dark and light. Then after that, you want to get them to get to know you. So you want to tell your core story. Now, what's interesting here is you dove deeper in this podcast on my core story than most people want to go. And so if people rewind this and they listen to this again, they'll hear basically my core story that I tell on my webinars.
Right.
It was just an interesting thing. Most people just want the surface level of my core story, and I don't go into as much depth as I did here. But you want to tell your core story. Now, it can be the core story of your business, or it could be the core story of yourself. So for me, mine's the core story of myself. But for many people, they don't have that type of story, but it's still a core story about your business. But here's the thing. When you're telling your core story, you need to make sure that your core story is relating to the audience. So just because you're telling a core story about your business, it's not about you. It's about why what you're going to talk about, by why what you do is valuable to the audience. Does that make sense?
Right. You got to correlate it. Now, and I'm currently in a couple of courses for this kind of stuff. And one of the things that I see a lot of people getting hung up on is their core story. And the difference between, my core story is rough and tumble growing up, and I've got all of these different stories. And I see people fall into this trap, and I've fallen into this trap too. It's not your whole story. It's one of those scenes that you can use to paint the current picture that you're trying to paint for somebody.
Right. It's a true story, but it's an edited story. So, for example, I'll give you the perfect example. Okay. So I told my core story about how moving to Atlanta, being a terrible radio advertising salesperson, right? That was in chronological order. Moving to Atlanta to work at the magic shop was in chronological order. Okay. The car drive, everything I said was true. By the way, don't ever make anything up.
Right.
But there was a whole piece in the middle before I decided to become a professional magician or really go for it. So those pieces were, I opened up a magic cart in the mall at Christmas, right? And that was successful. And then I thought I was an entrepreneurial genius, and I took that money and bought a karate school. Right now, I left.
That's a tough gig.
Right? Yeah, I left all of that out. Okay,
Right.
and now in a seminar situation, I would tell my entire, if it was just me and I was I tell my entire core story, because my audience is made up of entrepreneurs who could really relate to that.
Right.
But I don't need to tell that entire story about the karate school and all of that to get my point across.
Right. You have all those stories or all those scenes prepared for you, and you can adjust to them. And I think for me, it's just practice makes that better. And
Absolutely. The more you tell it,
at it.
Yeah, the more you tell it, the better you get at it. So that's what you said something which was really important, which you were alluding to, like the first time you do it. The first time you do it is probably not going to be good. So the first time, so when I'm introducing a new routine into my show, and almost every performer, comedian, whatever, will bury a new routine like in the middle of their show, because they know it's not going to be as good as the routine that they've done 500 times before that. Doesn't mean you don't put it in. Just know that you're not going to be good the first time you do it. But it doesn't matter. You just keep doing it.
Right.
So you tell your story now. So that's the opening. That's everything your opening needs to accomplish. Now you move into the content section. And honestly, this is where almost everybody messes up. All right. Here's what you want in the content section. You want 3 pieces of useful information, not 5, not 7, 3, no more than 3. If you want to look up, everyone can look up on Google the power of 3 when it comes to teaching and storytelling. By the way, I no longer use the word teaching. I use the word content that sells, because teaching gives the wrong impression. Remember, the purpose of this is to set up the desire for the offer at the end. So the biggest secret I can give everybody, well, first is 3 pieces of content, not more than 3. Do not get into the nitty-gritty details. And tell people, here's the big one, what to do, not how to do it. Do not get into the how to do it, right? And here's why. First of all, if you deliver too much information, everyone says, well, I want to give a lot of value. I want to give a lot of value. The problem with giving a lot of value, thinking that you're giving a lot of value by teaching a lot of stuff, is number one, your audience will be confused, right? If you start getting into the nitty gritty minutia of what you need to do, what the prospect needs to do to get the result that they desire, they're going to get confused, right? They're going to blank. I mean, it's just very confusing. The other bad thing that happens is if you deliver so much information that you leave the prospect with the false belief that they can get the solution that they desire without you, you've done them a disservice, because there's no way, unless you're selling the simplest solution on the planet, and in that case, you don't need to be doing this. You don't need to be doing a one-to-many presentation.
Right.
There's no way in 75 minutes or 2 hours or 2.5 hours that you could teach somebody to get the same results that you're going to get for them, because that's your skill set. But if you leave them, oh, they gave me all the information that I needed, then you're actually doing your audience. You're not providing value. You're doing the opposite.
Right.
Right. So 3 pieces of information. What are the 3 major things that someone will need to know? And then tell them what to do, but not how to do it. By the way, that's really valuable information, because people don't even know what to do, let alone the how to do it.
Right.
I'm telling you, when I review someone's presentation, one of the things I almost always cut out a lot of is the teaching part. Everyone is over delivering on the teaching part, and they're doing their audiences a gigantic disservice.
Right.
Just want to check in and make sure this is all making sense, or if you have any questions.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. So now we'll move into the close. And you need smooth transitions, by the way, in between all of these pieces of content. So this is another mistake that people make, and I'm sure you've seen it, is inexperienced speakers who are selling. They like the teaching part, right? They like getting up there and they like sharing their knowledge. And then they're moving into the close, and their entire energy changes, right?
Yes.
They tighten up.
You kind of want to baby buy this from me? Like maybe.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly it. Right there, and they tighten up their energy. They start talking faster. They start talking slower, or they stop moving, or whatever. And so again, that only comes from having your presentation down and understanding. If you understand that your entire presentation is a close, the closing sequence is just the natural progression.
Right.
So you transition into the close, and the way that I typically transition is doing a recap of everything that I said. And then I say, but I want you to get this one thing. And then whatever the major point is that I want them to understand, that they must understand in order to want to take the next step. So for example, let's say I'm a financial advisor. I just done my presentation. I just recap what it's about. And I would say, so for example, I would say, but there's one thing I want you to understand. Regardless of where you are right now financially, it's not too late to plan for your retirement so you live your golden years in style. The key is that you need to start right now. Okay? So that I need my audience to believe that statement. It's the statement that my audience must buy into,
right,
in order for them to want to progress. And so now I'm going to do my close. In your close, what you want to do is you do need to describe the features of whatever it is you're offering. So if you're offering a consultation, where is it? Is it via Zoom? Is it in person? How long is it? All of that kind of stuff, but you want to go through that quickly. If you're selling an info product and you're selling an online course, you do want to tell them that it's a video-based course and it comes all of that. But you don't want to spend a lot of time on that. And it's funny, even people who are really good marketers, I see make this mistake all of the time. I was doing a webinar with a guy, and he was selling something to my list, and he says, whoa, and you get a 176-page manual, and you get 6 CDs. And that's all he was saying. And so I had to step in, right? So you do have to tell them what they're going to get, but you really want to focus on the benefits of what they're going to receive. Right. So what are the benefits of it? And for people that are selling via consultation, remember this, you're not selling your service. You're selling the next step, which is to get the person to sign up for the consultation. So in your presentation, you do want to future pace how it would be after they work with you. But
Right.
when you're doing your close, you're not selling all of that. You're just selling them on, hey, let's set up a call to discuss this. And so you talk about all of the benefits of whether it's a consultation or what your product is, the outcomes that they're going to receive just from the consultation with you. And then you do your call to action. And your call to action needs to be very, very clear. This is another point where people mess up. In fact, I had an attorney, Linda Sherfy, who had a great presentation. I actually helped her develop it. And she went and did it, and she was doing it. She said, Dave, I'm not closing. I'm like, God, this presentation's so good. And then I watched her do it. And the problem was she was very vague with her call to action. People didn't really know what they were supposed to do. Yeah. And so we just made that simple switch, and now she closes 75% of the room. So tell people exactly what they're supposed to do and what's going to happen when they do it.
Right.
So, hey, open up a new browser window and type in this simple URL, or click the button that says, let's get started, that you see on the screen. And when you do that, you'll be taken to my online calendar, and then you'll be able to pick a date that works for you. So
right.
you really explain it to them.
Like you're explaining it to a third grader.
Like you're explaining it to a third grader. I'll often say, take your mouse, like literally, and click the button that you see on the screen. And then you want to do your close multiple times. And one of the most important things, though, is something at the very, very end, which I call the sincerity close. And this does not mean you've been insincere during the rest of your presentation. But this is a close. There's not a slide for it. This is a close that just comes from your heart. And I have mine unscripted because I just want to tell that person that's maybe they're nervous or they're skeptical. I just want to speak from my heart about what I truly believe about the product or the service that I'm offering. I actually came up with this doing this live with a client of mine. He's been a client of mine now for 5 years. And we put together with certain clients this one-day launch. It's a 4-hour broadcast that we do. And it's broken apart into 3 segments. Follows the same structure of everything we're just talking about, but it's just longer. And so he was really nervous because he had never done this. He's been on stages, but never in front of a camera in a studio. And so in the third segment, it's an interview segment. So I'm acting as Johnny Carson, I'll use Johnny Carson because he was the best. Johnny Carson, and I'm interviewing him. And he's on stage, and we're doing great. And then at the very, very end, and I didn't tell him why I was going to do this. I said to him, Michael, for the folks that have been watching this all day, and they still haven't pulled the trigger, they're sitting on the fence, they're a little bit nervous, what would you say to them? And I got up, walked off of the stage, leaving him alone on the stage. Remember, this is a guy that has never done this before. Now, fortunately, and it was awesome because then the camera zoomed in on him. So it's just him alone on the stage. And he delivered, because the guy's the real deal, and he really believed in what he was doing. Such a passionate, it's not even a sales pitch, just passionate talk about why someone should take advantage of this opportunity. He absolutely killed it. And then, so you do that, then you do one more call to action, and then you go into your Q&A. But you don't answer questions until the very, very end. And then remember that the Q&A is really a sales tool. The entire thing's a close, right? So your Q&A, you should be taking questions, 2 types of questions. One about the actual content of your presentation, but you also want to take questions about, so wait a minute, is this consultation really free? Those type of questions.
Right. Wonderful.
So
okay.
That's the basic structure.
So I've fallen victim to some problems in this selling from the stage world, right? And I can kind of foresee some hesitation from a lot of folks that hey, I want to do this, but I don't, or I've tried a couple times and I'm nervous to keep going because I've had these failure moments. I had a really hard time and probably still struggle with feeling like I'm saying the same thing over and over and over and over again And at the end of the day, you're going to, right? Because you're going to rehearse this and you're going to get better and you're going to tweak it. And that's what it takes, because to make money, you have to figure out something that's repeatable process, right? What do you tell to the person that's like, man, I'm not an actor. I can't, this isn't in my wheelhouse. You say, hey, learn how to do it, or
yeah. Well,
walk
I mean,
away?
that's my dream, is to get to that point, right? There's nothing better when you can do it without being unconsciously competent, right? So when I was doing 40 shows a month or 30 shows a month, I was literally packing up. I got so good that I was packing up the show as I was doing the show. So when I went to the next show, it would be ready, right? Because I didn't have to think about it. And here's the important thing about this. When you get to that level, now you can be fully present with your audience. So meaning, especially when you're on stage in front of a live audience, you can be fully present with them, and it allows for ad-libbing, because you don't have to think about what you're going to say. You get such a comfort level with it. Now, granted, on a webinar, webinars are more difficult in that respect, because you're not getting that feedback. Now, there are ways to get feedback, by the way. So you want to constantly be having people write stuff in the chat and taking polls and doing all this kind of stuff for many reasons. But one reason is for you, right? But another reason is for something called compliance. But that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I say is we're all going to get bored with our stuff before our audiences get bored with our stuff. And it's a huge mistake that people make. And it goes all the way back to when people were running ads in magazines and newspapers. You get bored with I got to change the ad. I got to change the ad. Is the ad still producing results for you? You don't have to.
Keep it running.
Yeah, one of my favorite things is when people fly into Atlanta for a day consultation with me, is and let's say they're having trouble generating leads. I'd say, well, what did you used to do to generate leads? And they list all of this stuff, and I say, well, which stuff worked the best? And they would say this and this. And here's my genius. I'd say, this is a great thing for an exercise for all your listeners to do. Do this exercise. Yeah. Which worked best? Which ones are you no longer doing? Guess what? Yeah, go back and start doing them again. When you start getting good, most people aren't anywhere near that level yet where they even need to worry about it. And let me tell you something, when you know you got a presentation and you do it and it brings in a pile of money, you're going to be very reluctant. So I'm very reluctant to change a presentation where I make $100,000 on it. Right. I want to be able to do that again. So before people worry about that, no one's anywhere near close, including myself. I don't think I'm there yet. So
I mean, you've got Tony Robbins and Gary Vee and all those guys saying the same stuff over and over at massive scale, and they're getting away with it. You can. It's not even getting away with it.
And here's the other thing: I've had people come to the same webinar. Like multiple times, and tell me, oh, that was the best one you've ever done.
Right.
Literally the same one.
Yes. Right. Is that because, like, when you read the same book over and over, you get more out of it, right?
100%. Yes. And people hear different things. So you're going to get bored with your presentation a lot, but as long as you're getting results from it, you won't get bored with results. I mean, I don't get bored saying, oh, wow, I just did this and I made $50,000.
No,
that's not a boring, right? That's an exciting thing. Yes. So like, I'm very reluctant, just like when like as an entertainer, when I have my show, if you ask anyone who's like a pro, they're very reluctant to put in new material if they've got something that works.
Right. Absolutely. Dave, I've had a blast. I think the audience has learned a lot today. We're approaching up on the hour, so
we are. Wow.
We're going to wrap this up for the day. Thank you so much. But before we go, if somebody wanted to work with you, how would they reach out?
Yeah, so the best way to do it, and I think this would be of value to everybody, even people who don't want to work with me, who aren't ready to work with me yet, is to subscribe to Sales Espresso. That's salesespresso.com. It's a daily fun newsletter all about selling, one-to-many selling and one-to-one selling, and it gives really great actionable strategies. Also, I do a live webinar for new subscribers periodically, all about what I call the ultimate client attraction machine, which really talk what we went over today, but in greater depth. And it gives them the entire model for how to use one-to-many selling to generate more leads and more clients. You get that free as a subscriber, and that's free just for subscribers. So if they go to salesespresso.com, they'll get the daily email newsletter, and then they'll get an invitation to the next live webinar that I do. And again, as I said at the very beginning, I do them live so I can answer questions. I think that's the best way for folks to get started. And then if once they get more of a flavor for me, if they want to work with me, there'll be opportunities for them to do that.
Wonderful. And we'll throw all of those links right in the bottom here. So if you want to reach out to Dave, learn more about him, join the webinar, get the newsletter, which I'll definitely be a subscriber of in about an hour from now, moving forward. Dave, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. Do you have anything else you'd like to leave the audience with?
No, just, I know a lot of people are struggling because of what's happening in the economy and what's happening in the world. Don't give up, right? If you've got this dream, if you've got this passion, there is a solution. You just got to, whether it's my solution or whether it's another solution from another guest, there is a solution. And man, when I was struggling, like really struggling, and I wanted to give up, I'm glad I didn't. So just keep doing stuff, right? Keep taking action.
Top sales guy in the country for your firm and $26,000 a year. That's
yeah, right. Exactly.
That's a long way to come. So
that's a long way to come. And it can be like that for everybody. I mean, it really can. Believe in yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. That's it for today's show, folks. If you'd like to join my text line community, the number is 314-370-2871. All you have to do to join that text line is send me any question about business or technology. I'll do all the research and I'll give you an absolutely free, totally unbiased answer. Get to work.